H games tend to come in two flavors: one-handed or two-handed games. Visual novels, management games, or interactive simulators are the types of games normally played with a mouse in one hand and a joystick in the other. These games tend to have male protagonists and have very little, if any, actual gameplay. Many of these aren't arguably games at all, but lumped together with games because they are interactive and use computer-generated graphics. The second type are what I consider two-handed games, H games that are trying to play more like what could be seen as a traditional game. Usually these games have a female protagonist and a much bigger emphasis on combat. This is where you find a lot of RPG Maker games. I call them two-handed games because you often need to use both hands on either a keyboard or a controller to play them. Castle in the Clouds DX definitely fits in the latter category more so than almost any other H game I played. With its heavy focus emulating the gameplay of classic 8-bit games of old, players may eventually forget that they aren't just playing a traditional 8-bit side-scroller. Castle in the Clouds DX is a spiritual sequel to the developer's highly praised previous game, Midnight Castle Succubus DX, and shares the same core aesthetic and gameplay. As Castle in the Clouds DX begins, you play a female bounty hunter named Lily. Hunting for her bounty, she decides to take a shortcut through the woods. There she is ambushed and wakes up in an unfamiliar town. The town is dealing with the all-too-common problem of having too many monsters and not enough brave people out there willing to kill them. So it's up to you to travel from location to location, killing the head monster in each classically themed level. Castle Succubus DX is not trying to hide its inspiration. It's a Castlevania clone. To be more specific, it's a Castlevania II Simon's Quest clone given a lewd paint job. This visual design is one of the game's biggest strengths. Despite the game trying to constrain itself to an 8-bit art style, the character animations are better than what you would find in a lot of 8-bit inspired indie games. The main character moves and jiggles in the ways you would expect for a game of this nature. It's interesting to see, despite Simon's Quest being derided as obtuse and boring by most modern gamers, you still see its influence in the Metroidvania genre to this day. Since Konami is not willing to give us any more from the Castlevania franchise, it's nice to see indie devs still pumping out Castlevania clones. Like Simon's Quest, Castle in the Clouds isn't a strictly linear game. Instead, you need to find and purchase items necessary to advance in certain stages. For example, I was stuck in the water level for a decent amount of time, until I figured out I had to get an item that I missed in the previous level in order to double jump out of a well. Many items are hidden and, while not necessary, add nice utility to your character's moveset. While Castle in the Clouds DX certainly appears to be Castlevania in most regards, one part that disappointed me is that this game was nowhere near as difficult. Most monsters are more of slight obstacles to be avoided than legitimate threats, and when you do eventually manage to die, you respawn in the same room you were killed in, taking away all tension. While the game does have difficulty options, increasing it doesn't change the fact that the monsters are slow and can be easily avoided. I personally would have doubled the amount of monsters on screen, doubled their speed, and added a live system to the game in order to give it more of a challenge. Though of course, Castle in the Clouds DX isn't just a traditional Castlevania clone, and while it definitely is more gameplay focused than most other games of its type, the game does have multiple H scenes. Most of these are viewed within a stage. If you see a monster with hearts over its head and happen to run into it, you activate an H scene. After the H scene ends, your character gains one lust point and damages all the enemies on screen for a small amount. While I obviously can't show you them, the H scenes in this game are nicely animated. However, since you unlock them in gameplay, I can't imagine ever stopping my session to look at them for long. I mean, if I am halfway through a level, I'm going to be more focused on completing that level. After a while, I just started skipping them once activated. Thankfully, however, the game does include a gallery mode, so you have something to look at once you are more free. One complaint I would bring up, however, is that there are only about 20 scenes in the game, and almost all of them are just Lily, the main character, rather than of the other characters of the town, or as I will talk about later, the bosses. Gaining lust points allows you to eventually sell yourself throughout the town. However, this isn't very useful because the game throws so much money at you within an hour or two of playing, you should have no issue buying nearly every item from the game's shops. Where the game shines the most is in its boss fights. The bosses of this game are not only the most creative parts of the game, but are the only times I ever really felt somewhat challenged. While I wouldn't call them groundbreaking in terms of gameplay design, they each felt distinct to fight. Furthermore, I love their visual designs. Each boss shows off the animator's talent in making appealing-looking characters despite their constraints. I honestly wish that instead of Lily, the bosses were the ones to get the H scenes as a reward for beating them. If Castle in the Clouds DX was nothing but a boss rush game and focused solely on that, it would have honestly been one of my favorite gaming experiences of the year. Castle in the Clouds DX is not a long game. Most people should be able to beat it in 3.5 to 6 hours, depending on if you get stuck or how much of the game you want to complete. In that time, I saw a few bugs. One that I experienced about 3 times in total is when my character's health went to 0, but instead of dying, she was able to walk around the stage, but I was unable to pause or exit the stage. Because of this, I had to restart the game, though this never lost me more than 2 minutes of progress. Castle in the Clouds DX is an interesting midpoint. Its gameplay is definitely above the vast majority of H games, but at the same time is not something I could recommend for its gameplay alone. Its visual improvements over Midnight Castle Succubus make a better H game, but I would say it's a downgrade in the gameplay department compared to that game as well. For only $13, Castle in the Clouds DX is a decent diversion that, while not everything I would have hoped for, is decent enough to entertain me in ways most H games have yet to.